Buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Susan Bonfield. Soy la directora del Environment for the Americas. Muchas gracias por participar en este programa del Día Mundial de las Aves Migratorias. Nuestra presentadora es Herminia de Panamá. Y Herminia, mucho gusto y muchas gracias por tu tiempo. He visitado a Panamá, es un país muy lindo, hermoso, pero quiero que tú tienes mucho tiempo para la presentación y por favor, puedes empezar.
Muy buenas tardes. ¿Me escuchan bien?
Sí, muy bien.
¿Ahí están viendo la pantalla?
No, no está en la pantalla. Funcionó muy bien antes, ¿no?
Con el mouse, ¿no?
¿Y ahora?
Sí, perfecto.
Ok. Muy buenas tardes. Soy Emi Peña, bióloga botánica. Soy escritora de cuentos infantiles de la serie Cuentos del Trópico. En mi segundo tomo, Cuentos de Agua Dulce y Salada, presento el cuento La Laguna Encantada. Como ya lo dije, soy botánica, así que busqué apoyo del profesor Ricardo Pérez, del Museo de Vertebrados de la Universidad de Panamá, y tiene una especialidad en ornitología, para lo que fueron los datos científicos de este cuento. Quiero hacerle un breve contexto de mi cuento. Está basado en la laguna de Matusagarati. Antes del 2017, cuando el humedal laguna de Matusagarati fue declarado refugio de vida silvestre, se desangraba durante años. Perdió incontables litros de agua debido a la mala práctica del desagüe por algunos empresarios. Este humedal, ubicado en la provincia de Darien, es el más grande de Panamá y uno de los 5 más importantes de Centroamérica. Es hogar de unas 9.000 especies de plantas vasculares, 200 mamíferos, 600 de aves, entre las cuales hay 50 especies en peligro de extinción, nacional e internacionalmente, 100 de reptiles, 120 de anfibios. Además, el 25% aproximadamente de las especies que alberga son endémicas, y esta riqueza sigue aumentando. En 2020, Orlando Ortiz y Alicia Ibáñez aportaron un nuevo registro para Panamá de la especie Montricharda linífera. Aunque sigue siendo amenazada por los monocultivos e incendios forestales provocados por ganaderos, tenemos la esperanza de una mayor conservación cuando transmitimos su representatividad biológica para el continente americano, ya que es un mega hotel a cielo abierto para aves migratorias quienes año tras año viajan desde Norte a Suramérica buscando refugio del invierno. Con base a este interés, cuento La Laguna Encantada. En lo profundo de la selva tropical del Darién está la laguna Matusagarati. Durante todo el año es hogar de miles de especies de animales, que además viven rodeados de plantas de diferentes formas y tamaños. Esto demuestra cuán hermosa y privilegiada es esta laguna, al poder albergar diversos tipos de vida. Sin embargo, algunos la llaman la Laguna Encantada, porque según la leyenda, en una noche estrellada cayó del cielo una piedra que lamentablemente fue tomada por las manos equivocadas. Un 31 de octubre de hace muchos años atrás, un hombre muy avaro recogió aquella piedra y la guardó en su casa. Al día siguiente, bien temprano por la mañana, miles de aves se posaron en los alrededores de su hogar. Aquella piedra poseía una energía que atraía a las aves. Impulsado por el deseo de atraparlas y venderlas por mucho dinero a compradores en el extranjero, aquel hombre se mudó a lo más interno de la laguna de Matusagarati. Y para que nadie viera las cosas malas que hacía, dijo que esa laguna permanecía encantada por brujas y que solo él podía controlarlas. Tiempo después descubrieron su mentira y lo llevaron a prisión. Aunque jamás encontraron la misteriosa piedra, se cree que aquel hombre avaro la enterró en algún lugar de la laguna, pues año tras año las aves nos siguen visitando desde lejanas tierras. Maestro Manuel, no es necesario que les cuente falsas historias a los estudiantes, reclamó la maestra Ana. Maestra, como siempre le digo, yo estuve aquí la vez que cayó un meteorito en Chepo. Esos son cuentos suyos. Aquello fue un rayo y no un meteorito. Además, nunca nadie ha visto esa dichosa piedra misteriosa. Niños, eso ha sido todo por hoy. Terminó la clase. Y recuerden, hacer la tarea que está pendiente. Fuera del salón de clases, los estudiantes caminaban para ir a casa. ¡Obed! ¡Espera! ¿Qué tal si lo que dice el maestro Manuel es verdad? Preguntó, intrigada May, la niña nueva del salón. May, eso es para darle emoción a la clase. ¿No escuchaste? Es una leyenda. No creo que eso del meteorito sea un cuento. Mira, para que se te quite el tema, mañana le pregunto a mi papá si nos puede llevar este fin de semana a la Laguna Encantada, ya que él es biólogo y ha trabajado por años en esa selva. Ese fin de semana, a continuación de los preparativos, Obed y May caminaban rumbo a la laguna, guiados por el papá de Obed, el señor Bernardo, quien iba mencionando las aves que se podían encontrar, como el playero coleador, la garza azul mayor, reinita acuática norteña, águila pescadora, gavilán ludo, el gallinazo cabecirrojo, en fin. ¿Contenta? ¿Ves que no pasa nada extraño, May?, preguntó Obed. ¡Espera! ¡Mira esa piedra! La guardaré en mi bolsa y el lunes se la mostraré al maestro Manuel. De regreso, notaron que en el cielo volaban miles de aves que parecían danzar, cuidando cada uno de sus movimientos para evitar chocarse. Es por la piedra que encontré, gritó May muy emocionada. No, niña. Desde agosto empiezan a llegar esas aves, pero hay más en octubre y diciembre. Todos los años pasan por aquí. Y si hay un cambio en el ambiente que las obligue a cambiar su ruta, podrían fallecer porque tendrían que buscar comida y refugio en otros lugares que no conocen, explicó el papá de Obed. Gracias, señor Bernardo. Pero acercándose a su amigo, susurró insistente: Obed, lo que me dice tu papá no me convence del todo. ¿Por qué las aves dejarían todos los años su hogar para viajar tanto? Y qué casualidad que es durante la misma época que dice la leyenda se encontró la piedra misteriosa. Cuando ellas ven que todo a su alrededor de su hogar comienza a cambiar, las hojas de los árboles se caen, hace más frío, activan su reloj natural de migración. Saben que el invierno llegará pronto y que deben partir de su casa en Canadá, Estados Unidos, incluyendo Alaska, a buscar refugio y alimento. Algunas llegan hasta Sudamérica y muchas otras se quedan en Centroamérica, como las que nos visitan principalmente en nuestras playas del Pacífico, declaró Betty. ¿Cómo hacen para que los animales que viven acá no se las coman fácilmente? Tienen una estrategia. Mudan su plumaje a uno menos colorido y muy parecido a nuestro ambiente. Posteriormente, en los meses de marzo a mayo, les regresa, lo que indica que pronto emigrarán hacia sus diferentes hogares de Norteamérica, donde anidarán. May admiró la piedra durante todo el resto del día. Cuando llegó el lunes a la escuela, se la enseñó al maestro Manuel. Este dijo que esa piedra no se veía ordinaria y que la llevaría a la Universidad de Panamá para que la examinaran los geólogos. Al instante le preguntó que dónde la había encontrado. Ella le contó que fue en la Laguna Encantada y que con una sonrisa en su rostro expresó: no estoy segura si en verdad está encantada, pero yo quedé encantada de conocerla. Listo, esto es parte de mi aporte como escritora de cuentos infantiles. Promuevo la cultura ecológica infantil.
Excelente, excelente. Muchísimas gracias, Emi. Saludos acá. Realmente es una experiencia fascinante trasladarse a estos lugares tan espectaculares, tan lejanos, pero tan cercanos a nosotros, y cómo se utiliza este recurso tan interesante que es el cuento para compartir un mensaje de conservación, y no solamente un mensaje de conservación, sino también información muy técnica, muy científica, para que los niños y los jóvenes puedan comprenderlo un poco mejor. Realmente es impresionante de mí, y es una combinación ideal la que tú presentas, ¿no? De ser artista y ser bióloga a la vez. Realmente es una combinación ideal, ya que permite el balance perfecto entre conocimiento y arte. Así que por nuestra parte, muchísimas gracias. No te nos alejes mucho porque posiblemente tengamos algunas preguntas. No sé si alguien tiene un comentario. Susan?
No, and Guido, I don't know if it's coming through for others, but your sound is a little corrupted. Is that coming through for all of you on the other end for tech?
¿Cómo me escuchas, Emi?
Es un poco raro. So I'm going to have you hop off, Guido, and maybe come back on.
Sure.
It's real rough, and I'm getting a little echo from my end too.
Tu sonido, sí, tu sonido se oye extraño.
Ok, listo. Gracias. Hablamos entonces en breve. Go ahead, Susan.
Okay. Thank you, Guido. Sorry about that. Thank you, Herminia. Muchas gracias por la historia. Es lindo. Y todo el país también. Me gusta también las láminas. Son increíbles el movimiento en las láminas. Y también en Panamá, ¿tú presentas en vivo o no?
Así es, así es. Yo misma también hago las láminas.
Ah, muy bien. Muchas gracias. Tenemos la próxima presentadora y voy a cambiar a inglés para ella. So I'm going to switch to English, and thank you again to Herminia for her wonderful story and presentation about Panama. Our next speaker is Vicki Vargas. And Vicki, I believe you are on. You can share with us your camera and your microphone and put up your presentation if you'd like. Vicki is from Denver, Colorado, and she has started a program in Denver, which is Lights Out. So Vicki, there you are. Great.
Hi.
Perfect. Wonderful. I'm going to have you go on and put up your presentation.
Oh, okay.
You'll just go to the bottom where it says share screen and then choose your presentation and have it open.
Okay. Sorry, I was assuming you guys were going to bring it up for me, so I'm going to.
You know, everybody has wanted to do it themselves, so we've capitulated. How do you put it? So we had two wonderful one in Spanish and one in English, both about collisions, Vicki. And so we just had a wonderful presentation from the American Bird Conservancy talking about collisions and the impacts of light, also
Wonderful.
where most of the collisions and why most of the collisions happen. So I know that everyone will be really interested to learn about your program. Are you able to get that up?
Yep, I do have it up.
Okay, so you'll need to go into share screen so that everybody else can see it. There you go. All right, I'm going to turn off my camera, Vicki, and I'm going to let you go on and start and describe your program and how a city can become a lights out city.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining me today, and I hope you're enjoying all of the presentations. I'm Vicki Vargas Madrid. I'm the Wildlife Program Administrator for Denver Parks and Recreation within the City and County of Denver. And today's presentation is going to be about Lights Out Denver, which is a fairly new program which we implemented a few years ago by Denver Parks and Recreation, along with a team of volunteers and collaborating organizations, Denver Audubon, Denver Museum of Nature and Science, Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, Community College of Denver, Greenwood Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, and our newly partner, Wild Bird Rescue. Oh, go ahead and click in here then. Okay, can everyone see the screen okay, Susan, I'm assuming?
Yes, perfect, Vicki. Thanks so much.
Okay. So just a brief agenda about what we're going to cover. I'm going to talk about anthropogenic sources of bird mortality or human-imposed mortality on birds, which is why Lights Out Denver and projects like it are in existence. I'm guessing that this is a topic that many of you are aware of, or at least have heard of throughout the globe, probably in some more presentations coming up. I'll also talk about the foundation of Lights Out Denver, how we got started, its progress so far, and where we plan on heading in the near future, as well as some of the current bird-friendly legislation that's been passed. Legislation in our mind is going to be an important piece of for us to be successful in this program. And it's also very encouraging to see how prominent that this topic is becoming in academic research, federal legislation, and everyday discourse amongst birders and non-birders. So when we think of human-caused bird deaths, I'll guess that many people, us included, think first of cats and collisions with buildings. We aren't wrong in that, but unfortunately, windows and cats aren't the only anthropogenic threats to birds. This table lists estimates of the highest sources of mortality. There we go. In the US, and after glancing through the table, you realize that our cities and structures are just not friendly to birds. In fact, each year in the US alone, more than 3 billion birds perish from anthropogenic sources. Granted, these are estimates, but the enormity of the fatalities are still alarming. And by far the biggest source of mortality are cats, both domestic and feral. On the top line in the table, collisions with building glass is the scope of which we work. Lights Out Denver aims to reduce bird collisions with buildings. We would love to reduce all sources of anthropogenic mortality, but we don't have the resources to do that. Probably nobody does. There are two hazards that I haven't included in this list, and that's habitat loss and artificial nighttime lighting. Both of these undoubtedly kill birds, indirectly and directly. My assumption is that bird mortality via habitat loss is extremely difficult to quantify, and that is associated with some of the other hazards, such as building collisions due to urban sprawl. Research is increasing into the effects of nighttime lighting on birds. Get another picture up here. Birds often confuse artificial lights for celestial cues and have been observed circling skyward facing light until exhaustion overcomes them. The most notorious example of this is the 9/11 memorial in New York City. On 9/11, each year, 2 beams of light are shot up from where the Twin Towers stood. And unfortunately, this display endangers nearly 160 birds each time they are lit up. You can see the photo on the left, the birds in the lights. Each one of those specks is a bird. Fortunately, to work together with the Memorial New York City Audubon has a team of volunteers that monitor this. And when a lot of birds encircle the light, these volunteers will notify the groundskeepers, which will then turn off the lights, allowing the birds to reorient themselves. Artificial nighttime lighting inside or outside of building is also believed to significantly induce window collisions. So why do programs like Lights Out Denver exist in the first place? You'd think by now birds would have learned to avoid glass, but they haven't and they can't. They continue to collide with glass and structures. And some of the reasons are that we think is that birds can't see glass. They can't differentiate it. Their eyes are often on the sides of their head and they don't see well directly in front of them. Many species are most active at night and lit up structures are tempting, drawing the birds towards them. Our cities are directly in their flyways. Denver, Colorado is in the central flyway, and other big cities such as Houston, Dallas, Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Salt Lake City are also located in the central flyway. And our cities not only have eliminated large swaths of their historical habitat, we've imposed a grid of illuminated and shimmering obstacles for them. Studies have shown that they're increasing their use of cities as stopover habitat in lieu of more suitable habitat, which makes sense since our cities continue to build and grow. But this is alarming because this can significantly reduce their chances of migration success. Next slide here. So this does beg the question, are all buildings bad? No, not all buildings are bad, but many are, at least to some extent. Brightly lit buildings often attract birds, especially at night. The Denver Convention Center, which is the picture on the left, provides an example of a well-lit building. And downtown Denver is growing and a lot of new development is taking place. And many of these buildings, both residential and commercial, are laden with glass. Architects love glass. So while these are aesthetically and architecturally pleasing to many, they are a huge threat to birds. Lots of these buildings also have greenery and water features around them, even inside their lobbies, which attracts birds. Denver isn't near any large bodies of water like some other cities on the eastern portion of the states, but we do have large river waterways throughout the city, such as the Platte River, Bear Creek, Cherry Creek, and these areas do provide habitat for birds. So when development abuts these bodies of water, which will soon be happening along our Platte River with more development, more and more birds will be colliding with buildings unless they are designed as bird-friendly buildings. So it's important to point out that studies have found that over 90% of all bird window collisions occur within the first 3 stories of a building. Many people at first want to focus on high rises, but it's the first 30 feet or so that do the most damage. And that's true of residential and commercial buildings. So our roots started in 2014 when Denver was designated as an urban bird treaty city. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Urban Bird Treaty Program is a conservation initiative between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and participating cities like Denver. And it brings together government agencies like Denver Parks, nonprofits, non-government groups, and academic institutions to provide citizens with opportunities to connect with nature through birding and conservation. Each designated city is tasked with conserving urban habitats for birds, reducing urban hazards for birds, and educating and engaging the community about birds and bird conservation. When Denver was designated by this program, one of the city's goals was to implement a lights out type of project. Shortly after, one was started by the Office of Sustainability, which is within the city and county of Denver, but it didn't get much traction or have much success getting off the ground. So at that time, Denver Parks was a partner of the project, but we didn't have the resources to move it forward until 2018 when our resources improved and it gained interest by management, city officials, and some bird conservation agencies, which are now our partners. Excuse me. So, oops, here we go. Sorry about that. So projects aimed at reducing urban bird collisions first started in the 1990s in Toronto. Since then, dozens of cities have adopted similar programs. Each of these programs consists of data collection and bird collisions that is used to understand basic trends and collision totals, vulnerability by species, collisions by building, and seasonal migration routes. Typically, this is achieved by reducing nighttime lighting, but it has been achieved also with window retrofits or the reduction of indoor greenery and water features. Lights Out Denver is largely based on these other projects. We consulted extensively with other administrators from projects in Baltimore, Michigan, Chicago, Ohio, and New York. And we've lent support and advice to fledgling programs in other cities. All of these projects collaborate with each other. We borrow ideas, we share data and goals with each other. And although each project is its own entity and might even have different names to it, we act as a network across the country and continent to try to reduce bird collisions. That is our goal. So we've outlined 3 different phases of our project. We're currently in phase 1, where we have boots on the ground. We started in the fall of 2019 with a team of volunteers collecting data. We have 2 major city routes that teams of volunteers walk. We identified some areas of downtown Denver as high densities of buildings, but we wanted to remain focused on getting the project off the ground before we expanded into other routes. Any deceased birds, depending on the state of the specimen, are taken to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science ornithology collection. And then all live species that we find go to our partner rehabilitators. Our main goal currently is to collect data on bird collisions, including the building and their frequency. We can then bring this data to building and business owners, city officials, planners, and developers in phase 2 and 3. Next fall, we hope to be in phase 2, engaging and approaching the downtown business officials or community. And our goal is to have building and business owners abide by our bird-friendly guidelines by turning their lights off, especially during the migratory season, which will be spring and fall. But ideally, we want them to turn them off year-round. In phase 3, we hope to work with city legislatures legislators to pass bird-friendly legislation in Denver. So this is an example of what we have collected so far on our routes since we started the program, a variety of different birds. We had over 30 volunteers helping us collect data and transport birds. And some of these volunteers helped us again in the second season. And now we have 10 dedicated volunteers that are assisting us this fall. So our volunteers also assist us with spreading the word about Lights Out, analyzing data, identifying birds that some of us aren't really great at. And every specimen is taken to the museum and it's tagged and recorded so that long-term data can be taken directly from the project. So the Lights Out Denver project presents a catch-22 of sorts. If our project is to be successful, meaning if we are to advance bird conservation in Denver, it's good to have data on a lot of birds. People who make the decisions want to see data, and it's going to be pretty important to show this data if we want to push legislation through the city's government. But on the other hand, we don't want to find a lot of birds because that means birds are dying at our hands in the city. So I'm hesitant to say that we want a lot of birds, but also hesitant to say we don't want any. The ones that we do find will hopefully have died for a cause. So that is my presentation. I am putting up Alex Halverson, who is my intern and has been very instrumental in kicking off our project. And so I just want to give a kudos to him as well. So we're working together on this, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Vicki. That's an excellent project. And I know that a number of cities have these types of projects going on. I just wanted to ask you maybe a couple questions. We have a little bit of time. And we have a few people interested in what's going on and how you set that up. Is it difficult to get buildings to join in a Lights Out program?
So at this point, we haven't had too much communication with the buildings. Just a few of some of the owners that we have actually been lucky enough to run into during our routes and our monitoring. But in the past, when it was first trying to be initiated, before we got more involved in it, that was one of the issues, is that building owners were asking the questions about data. How can you prove that our building is killing birds? Mm-hmm. So that's why we see being able to provide the data is going to be pretty important to these folks.
Yeah. And then have you looked at other cities, or do you know of any of the other cities who have Lights Out programs also?
Oh, yes. So all the large cities that I mentioned, of course, Toronto, Canada is a big advocate for these types of programs. They're doing a great job there. Mm-hmm. So yes, Baltimore.
Chicago, yeah, yes. Lights Out program. And I know a lot of them, I don't know if you were watching this fall as migration was underway, and there was what I thought was really nice to see was that a lot of people were announcing where birds are on their migration and asking people to turn out their lights. I don't know if you noticed that, but is there any suggestion for kind of a seasonal, also increased wave of Lights Out?
Well, so that is definitely our goal with Lights Out Denver, is we are wanting to encourage business owners, building owners to turn their lights off during the migration routes for sure. So in the spring and in the fall, but we would hopefully encourage them to turn them off at night as much as possible. But yes, we're really focusing on the migration seasons.
Yes, right. Okay. Any other last comments, Vicki, or anything you would encourage, like if another city wanted to do this, any tips for success?
It takes a lot of effort and volunteers. I think that might have been our biggest challenge, is really finding the dedicated volunteers. They're out at 5:30 in the morning, 5 to 5:30 in the morning, hitting the streets, and it's hard to get that kind of assistance. But we've been lucky to have the volunteers that we do have, and it's just sticking with it and following through once you start it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure it would be a difficult, it's nice when you can find a bird that you can rehab, and then sad when you can't. So one thing that I also wanted to mention to everybody, I was noticing your sponsors, which is great. I wanted to give a shout out to Greenwood Wildlife Rehabilitation. I know the rehabilitators are an important part of this, because Greenwood Wildlife is one of the few organizations actually near to Denver that actually accepts birds and can rehabilitate them. Greenwood Wildlife also has a booth in our Booth Central. So if you go to boothcentral.com and find our event under Bird Day Live or Environment for the Americas, you can go visit Greenwood Wildlife and learn about how they do that, because it is a very special skill. It takes a lot of work, a lot of late nights, and maybe all nights even, to help send those birds back on their way. So many thanks to Greenwood Wildlife, not only for having a booth, but for the great work that they do.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you, Vicki. I'm going to let you go. And we were hoping to have another presenter. I see that we're
Hello.
Are you there, Guido?
I am here.
Oh, I think that's better.
The question is whether the technology is behind me.
Okay. Well, I think if you wanted to do a short presentation, we have the time. And if your sound holds out, that'd be great.
That'll be fantastic. Well, let me give you a brief introduction about our efforts down here. Well, for starters, for those of you who haven't met me, my name is Guido Berguido. I am a biologist here in Panama, and I'm responsible for coordinating World Migratory Bird Day events in Central America, jointly with EFTA, with Environment for the Americas. But locally here in Panama, I am the executive director for a local non-governmental charity organization known as Adopta Panama Rainforest, or Adopta Bosque for short. And since I have a little time, I would love for you to give you a little introduction about our organization here in Panama and what we have been doing and how it all started in these efforts. So basically, the name of Adopta Bosque, more than just a name, it's an invitation so that people would empower themselves and realize that they are the ones ultimately responsible for helping our environment. So Adopta Rainforest, or Adopta Bosque, which is a Spanish form, is the idea behind this initiative. The way it started, believe it or not, it has to do a lot with birds, because I have been bird watching for nearly 30 years now, and I have been very excited about all the beautiful birds, not just the migratory ones, but the local resident species as well. Living in Panama, which is a very, very small country, yet it has great diversity of bird life, including more species of birds than all of the US and Canada combined. We have over 1,010 different species of birds here in Little Panama. So back in 2004, I was trying to find as many bird species as possible all throughout the country. I was traveling all over the country looking for many different species of birds, and at that time I had seen close to 700 species, which is not too bad, but in a country that has over 1,000 species, it meant that there were still many more species to be seen. So I decided to look up. I did my homework, right? And I was looking at the field guidebooks and everything to try to determine where were these species that were eluding me, where were they located? And so we were traveling all over the country, and I realized that a bulk of the species that I had yet to see were ones found in the eastern part of the country, the southeastern part of the country near Colombia. And there are a number of mountain ranges that are in that area of the country that have a number of species that are unique to these areas, that are endemic to these mountain ranges. Some of them regionally endemic between Colombia and Panama, yet others are endemic completely to a couple of those mountains. So I started going, exploring the maps to try to find out where I could locate these species of birds that I had never seen before. Many of them were endemics. And that's when I realized that they were just too far away without any facilities, no roads. There's a place, or there's a location we call the Darien Gap, which literally means is that the only interruption in the Pan American Highway from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego. So in Panama, in the Darien region, there's a gap, an interruption on that highway. So it was very difficult to reach some of these high mountains with high endemism of species. And that's when I started looking at the maps of the country, topographical maps, and I noticed that there were some mountains that were much closer to Panama City. For instance, in the area of the Majé mountain range, and one in particular that stood out there called Cerro Chucanti. This mountain seemed very promising because it reached to nearly 5,000 feet in elevation. So 1,439 meters roughly is the elevation of this mountain that we notice on the map. And we knew that those kinds of elevations, it has a different kind of habitat. It's much cooler, unlike the 90 temperature degrees here in the lowlands. Up in the high mountains, the temperatures can get to 65 or under that. But it's a completely different scene, a completely different forest types, a cloud forest. And those are the kind of forests that have endemic species. So back in 2004, I managed to get myself up to one of these mountains, in Cerro Chucanti in particular, and we were like, wow, blown away by the diversity of wildlife that we kept seeing, all these waterfalls, a scenario, and we saw a number of species like the black spider monkey, which is a critically endangered species of monkey, and very hard to see. And we found it in this one mountain, and we started seeing a number of birds that I had never seen before in my life, the very desirable life birds. So, however, it's so amazing that I started coming back relatively frequently, like every couple of weeks, every month or so, I would try to come over and explore more of Cerro Chucanti. And that's how I started noticing that every time we came, there was more and more deforestation going on, of habitat disappearing. And so, for instance, we found one group of birds called manakins. Manakins are very territorial, and they're very likely to remain in that territory, that lek, over years, right? Year after year after year. The whole family stays around there in that territory. So what happened is that I decided that, a friend of mine wanted to see these manakins. So when we went back a couple of weeks later, we were traveling up the mountain, and it was a long, nearly 5-hour horseback ride up to these mountains. I'm not sure if you folks like horses, but imagine sitting on a horse for 5 hours or so. It's kind of an adventure, to say the least. So we went up to this mountain on that occasion with my friend that wanted to see this mannequin lek. And much to our surprise, on that second trip, we did not see the mannequins because, as a matter of fact, the local farmers who own some of that area, those areas, had clear cut that piece of land for farming. So it was very, tragic for us to witness all of that going on. So that's how it all started, and we managed to secure that eventually, purchase some land, and continue on with nowadays the Adopt Panama Rainforest Association. How are we doing there, Susan?
We're doing great, but now we're ready to go on, and I just want to thank you, Guido. Adopt the Bosque has been a big partner and supporter of World Migratory Bird Day, and we really appreciate all that Guido does in Panama for resident and migratory species of all types and varieties. So it's amazing work. If you get a chance to go down, Guido also has the opportunity and staff to do tours and all sorts of things, taking you into places you would never see. And he's an amazing naturalist. So we have all of our panelists on, Guido. And what I thought we would do is have them all turn on their cameras, and we'll just do a quick introduction with everyone, and then we'll move into the presentation.
Amy, perdón. I'm not sure if Amy's still on. Amy, ¿te puedes encender la cámara?
So if all the Caribbean panelists, Lisa and Joe, Eric, Anthony.
No sé por qué no se activa.
Could turn on their cameras, that would be great.
La cámara porque no se activa.
Who is under the...
Guido y Emily ya pueden retirarse.
Okay.
Okay. Buenas tardes.
Gracias.
All right, there we go. Why don't we just, Guido, we'll start in order of the presentations, and we can start with Lisa and just do quick introductions. Lisa Sorensen, can you unmute and introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. Hi, everybody. I am Lisa Sorensen. Good to see you all. I am with Birds Caribbean. I'm the executive director, and my nonprofit is dedicated to conserving birds and nature throughout all the islands of the Caribbean. And of course, the Caribbean islands are super important for migratory birds. So we're super excited to be part of World Migratory Bird Day celebrations in the fall. And we have a lot of good stuff going on. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Lisa. And Joe.
Hello, I'm happy to be here also. And I've been involved with Birds Caribbean for a few years. I'm a retired Forest Service research biologist working on migrant birds throughout the Caribbean. And yeah, so I'm happy to be here and happy to present.
Thank you, Joe. And Anthony?
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Bonjour. Lisa, you have to explain me how to put these ducks behind you, because I have only an ugly door and I'm really jealous.
Oh, that's a secret I cannot share with you, Anthony. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yes, I'm Anthony, living in Guadeloupe since over 20 years now. I am from France, and I'm particularly interested in birds, migratory bird species. So happy to be here. Thank you, Sue, for everything.
Thank you, Anthony. And Eric.
Yeah, hi. I'm Eric Carey. I'm Executive Director of the Bahamas National Trust. I've been involved with Birds Caribbean longer than Lisa, and not nearly as long as Joe. And it's a great pleasure to be involved with all these great people today. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
And I'm going to actually sign out and come back on with a different device. So you can let me in.
Fine.
All right,
and we're actually waiting for one more speaker, but now we'll go on and get started. So I'll have Joe and Anthony, if you can put down your cameras. Then Lisa, you can go on and put up your presentation.
Okay. Just give me 1 second. All right, so I need to share my screen, right?
Yes, so if you just go down to share screen and select your presentation.
I can do that. All right, and I have to do the, hold on. Slideshow, play from the start. All right, is that working?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right, so hi everybody. I'm just excited to share today a little bit about impacts of hurricanes on birds. I think everybody's been hearing in the news a lot lately about catastrophic environmental events, fires, hurricanes. They seem to just be increasing in intensity and frequency and the amount of damage that we're doing. So of course, it's a huge concern should be a huge concern for everybody all over the world, and it is in the Caribbean as well. So I just want to share with you about an effort that we had with helping out birds after Hurricanes Irma and Maria, and a little bit more about sort of the islands and the birds that we have, and why it's important for citizens to get involved and what you can do to help. So as probably a lot of you guys already know, the Caribbean is known as a biodiversity hotspot. We have over 700 species of birds. 171 are endemic, meaning that they're not found anywhere else in the world, and just incredibly unique and beautiful birds. 54 of these are globally threatened. So the Caribbean, like other parts of the world, is experiencing lots of threats to biodiversity and lots of species that are declining, unfortunately. So the Caribbean is also a winter home or a stopover site for many neotropical migrants. So land birds, water birds, shorebirds, raptors, all kinds of birds depend on the islands. Some of them just pass through either on their southbound and or northbound migration in the fall and spring. Others come and they stay for the whole winter. They may be here from July or August all the way to April or May. So in the Caribbean, we like to say they're our birds. In the Northern Hemisphere, they're only there for maybe 3 or 4 months. So they really, some of the birds spend a lot of time in the Caribbean and the islands. And you can see here just a few of the songbirds that make it down there, some very familiar ones. We also have a lot of shorebirds. You can see here this whimbrel just arrived to St. Martin in September. You can see how skinny it is there. It probably traveled for a few thousand miles and lost a ton of weight. Before they start migration, they look like flying footballs, but it's burned up all its fat on migration. It's also an important area for a species of environmental concern called the red knot. It's also a stronghold for some species at risk. For example, it's the only known wintering ground for the globally endangered Kirtland's warbler and the Bicknell's thrush. As many of you probably know, the Kirtland's warbler was an endangered species. It's known for nesting only in jack pine forests in some parts of Eastern North America and Eastern Canada. So it's a habitat specialist, and over many years of surveys and searches for this bird and research, we know that the Bahamas are the most important area for this bird for its wintering grounds. So the Bahamas National Trust and many government and NGO partners are working to enhance conservation of the species in the Bahamas and its wintering grounds as well as its breeding grounds. The Caribbean is also a very important wintering area for the near threatened piping plover. This bird has been declining, lots of threats to its habitat, breeding areas, and also wintering areas. And then the Bicknell's thrush as well. So in recent times, just in the last few years, have we learned a lot about the wintering grounds of the piping plover. A few years ago, Audubon helped out the Bahamas National Trust with a bunch of surveys, and they discovered huge numbers of wintering piping plovers, for example, in the Jolter Keys. And as a result, a new national park was named to protect this bird, which is really phenomenal. But we really didn't know where else the bird was wintering, or just some spotty records from, say, Turks and Caicos and Cuba. So Canadian Wildlife Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, Birds Caribbean, we've all been helping out with, and our partners, local partners in the islands, with getting out there during our Caribbean waterbird census every winter, and also the International Piping Plover Survey, and looking for this bird. And many more birds have just been found in the last few years from these surveys, showing the value of these surveys. So here's just a quick image of a map showing where birds have been found on the last piping plover census. You can see the North Keys of Cuba, and then also throughout many of the Bahama Islands, and also in the Turks and Caicos. This is the main wintering area of the piping plover in the Caribbean. And it shows up occasionally in other islands as well. So you always need to be on the lookout for it. There could be some other undiscovered areas that are important for this species. We recently experienced, just last year, Hurricane Darien, and that just absolutely devastated Grand Bahama and Abaco. Just a few pictures of the habitat here showing how the winds just snapped off the top of the pine forest trees. And they were inundated with a few feet of salt water, and then fires, some brush fires burned through. In the lower right, you see a picture of one of the beaches in Grand Bahama, just showing how thrashed it is, and just all the rubble on the beach and the dead trees. So the Bahamas are still very much in recovery mode. So I'm going to talk mostly today about Hurricanes Irma and Maria, though, and what happened with that devastating hurricane. It was in September of 2017. Irma approached the Leeward Islands, and it was massive. Look how big it is right there. It's a Category 5 hurricane, and it's just approaching Puerto Rico there. It's the strongest hurricane to occur on record. This shows the track of the two hurricanes, which hit within just a couple weeks of each other. First Irma and then Maria. They went over the Greater Antilles and then to the Lesser Antilles, and some islands took a direct hit. This is what it looked like after, in the aftermath, just utter devastation, flooding everywhere you looked. It was just really incredible because these hurricanes took out so many islands were impacted. After the storms, of course, we were very concerned about how our partners were doing, how had they fared, were they okay, were their houses damaged? Thankfully, everybody that we knew was safe. But then reports started coming in about the impacts on the birds. And first of all, in the Kyokoku Keys, where there's tens of thousands of flamingos, photos and videos started showing up of just dead flamingos everywhere, just draped over the mangroves. It was just utterly heartbreaking. And I think just being such tall, gangly birds, it was very hard for them to hide. Fortunately, in Inaugural, we heard from the warden there, Henry Nixon, that the flamingos seemed to have come through okay. They must have been able to hunker down in the mangroves. But thankfully, they seemed to survive the hurricane pretty well. Now, when a hurricane hits, of course, there's the direct effects, and that's when the birds are just killed outright, and there's just lots of damage to the habitat. So we do get reports of dead birds being found. Of course, it's hard to find them, and they quickly probably get eaten by predators, so you don't find them. Often the birds are small, and we don't find the carcasses, but a few do show up, and we hear about them. But most importantly, there's just incredible habitat damage. There's a before and after picture here in Trafalgar Falls, Dominica, just showing the devastation and all the trees that were killed and denuded of leaves. This is in St. Eustatius, the photo above and below showing the difference in what happened to the habitat there. Puerto Rican parrots, you can see a dead, I think that's a gannet in the upper right. And then the magnificent frigate colony, normally in Barbuda, this would be huge mangroves with tons of green leaves, big tall towering trees, and all that's left is of the branches. But yet the birds were there, the ones that had survived anyway. And then here's a before and after picture of the British Virgin Islands. And as one of our partners said, from the ocean to the sky, the natural world is struggling to cope in the aftermath of the storms. We had reports of pigeons and doves, weak, dazed and confused, standing around in the road and just falling over from hunger. Parrots flying down uncharacteristically from the mountain forests right into towns in search of food. Warblers were on the ground and at dump sites foraging for food. You see in the upper right, a hummingbird that's just trying to feed on a brightly colored piece of paper since there were no flowers around. The nectarivores, of course, had no natural foods. And if there were any feeders up, then they were just absolutely mobbed. The picture in the lower right, I think I counted 36 banana quits around that feeder. So, of course, feeding birds can be hugely important in the aftermath of the storm. So as we started hearing about, how there was no vegetation left on the trees, no flowers, hummingbirds starving, other birds hungry, we decided to mobilize and see if we could help out our partners and the birds by organizing a shipment of bird feeding supplies and equipment. And we started fundraising, and we've been hearing also about how our partners, their offices and buildings were damaged. They lost all kinds of equipment and had damage in their parks to the infrastructure and so forth. So we held a fundraising campaign, and we're just, amazed at how generous people stepped up and contributed to the fund. And this went to doing a lot of post-hurricane surveys in a number of islands for many species. And we provided a number of grants to our partners to do restoration activities such as planting trees and repairing their infrastructure, replacing equipment, and so forth. The other thing that we decided to do was to send feeder and nectar and seeds. So we got in touch with some bird feed supply companies, and they were super helpful. They donated bird seed. We had bird feeding companies that gave us discounts on lots of feeders. And then we began the logistics of trying to organize these shipments to the islands. We had to do it all by sea freight. And of course, many ports were damaged and lots of relief supplies were coming in. So it was kind of a nightmare to organize all this, but we were able to do it. And as you see there, Lizzie Mae Dry Goods kindly provided a special high energy island relief wild bird mix for us, which was so kind and helpful. And then all the items were shipped to Florida to like Tropical Shipping and other local shipping companies. And we had local volunteers that organized everything into pallets and figured out what was going where. And you can see here some of our partners that received these items in Puerto Rico and St. Martin and Anguilla. Everybody was really happy. They would hold events where they gave these items away, advertised on the radio and Facebook, and people were super excited to get the items and help the birds. So these are some pictures of some giveaway events that were organized, and you know, it was weeks and even months for many of our partners to recover. You know, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have water, they might have had a tarp over their head for a roof, but yet people were happy to help the birds. And we were just so amazed at how excited people were to get these free supplies and set them up in their backyard. And we also gave feeders to a lot of schools. And there, you know, a forestry officer or teachers would show students how to set the feeders up, how to mix up the nectar. You can see bird feeding stations were set up in Dominica, and this was true in other islands as well. They were making homemade feeding stations. Forest ranger in Dominica showing students how to set up the feeders, just some more shots of the kids. Happy to participate in the project. So this is just kind of a summary graphic of what we ended up doing. From Miami, we shipped out supplies to all these different islands, 4,200 hummingbird feeders, nearly 2,000 bottles of nectar concentrate, and 5 tons of bird seed. And these were some of the reactions that we got. People love them. They're so excited to be able to help the birds. Parrot species, doves, songbirds, all kinds of birds were helped by the seed and the feeders. And in the Caribbean, warblers would come to feeders as well. So they like to drink nectar. So it was helpful to the migratory warblers as well. And we were happy with the effort that everybody made. It was a huge monumental effort, labor of love. Partners in Flight gave everybody a Partners in Flight Leadership Award for this big regional effort and coming together to help the birds. And some of the lessons learned: how can we help birds in the short and long term? Well, it's important to be ready in hurricane season to provide nectar, you know, be stocked up on sugar and have your feeders cleaned and ready to go if you have a storm coming. Restore and clean up habitats is something that we should need to be doing all the time anyway to provide birds with high quality habitat, and in areas that have been damaged to clean up and to restore those habitats. Plant native trees that are beneficial to birds. You know, find out what trees on your island are best for birds at providing food. There's lots of great information about that, and we have some of that on our website in this free ebook that you can download from our website. It's really important that we protect our natural infrastructure, wetlands and mangroves and coral reefs. All these areas help protect us. You know, they're not only good for the wildlife, but they're good for humans. They provide ecosystem services and protect the shoreline and protect us from the worst damage of the storms. I want to give a shout out to St. Croix Environmental Association. They were one of our partners, and just recently they put up this really nice video about how to prepare for a hurricane. They show you how to make a do-it-yourself feeder and advise you on how to make nectar. And so check that out. It's a really great fun resource. So what did we learn? Well, we learned that we can mobilize quickly and to help the islands and our partners recover. We found that this project really raised a lot of environmental awareness and appreciation for birds, that we depend on nature for our survival. You know, in this COVID-19 pandemic, I think it makes us think think again about our relationship to nature and how important it is to protect nature, that we depend on nature and for our survival, and also spending time in nature is healing and brings people a lot of joy. And so it's great to, I think, seize on these opportunities to educate further, you know, to tell people to plant native trees and flowers, show them how to do that, provide nurseries so that they can find these plants. And I know this is something that the Bahamas National Trust is working on. And then we need to work harder to protect our remaining forests and wetlands. You know, mangroves should just be off limits to any kind of development. And yet, despite, you know, protections that are supposedly in place and governments saying the right thing, that they want to protect mangroves, then they're still letting development happen. So it's up to local people to elect leaders that will protect our habitats. And then if they don't, to speak up and fight for conserving places that are nature. You know, that's what makes the island special, and that's why people visit. So our work is never done. We still have an active hurricane fund. We raised some funds for Hurricane Dorian and have been helping out the BNT with some funds for their projects and replacing equipment that's lost, and restoration on Grand Bahama and Abaco. And I would encourage everybody, if you don't know Birds Caribbean, to start following us on social media. We would love for you to become a member and sign up for a monthly newsletter. So please visit our website and do that. And just a quick shout out to all the donors that have supported our crowdfunding campaign with donations and supplies. All of our amazing partners and volunteers throughout the islands that take care of their local birds and raise awareness and distributed the feeders and seed, and then all the residents and school children that feed birds in their backyard and at their schoolyards. So that is it. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
So actually what we're going to do, Lisa, is take questions at the end and let the entire panel handle that. So thank you so much, Lisa. I'll let you take down your presentation.
Sure.
For everybody out there, Birds Caribbean has about one of the funnest conferences around. So if you get a chance to go to it, I highly advise it. So what I'm going to do for the, for the next presentation is, Joe, I'll put your presentation up for you. And you can begin when you're ready.
All right. Just want to make sure you can hear me. I'm not muted.
You're not muted. You're loud and clear.
All right. Well, Lisa gave an excellent overview of migrants, and I want to follow up on that. And I'm going to give some examples of migration and some history of these studies that have been done to follow migrants and to examine the stresses they face when they come into the region. Now I'm going to, let's see if I can get this to move forward.
Yeah, I have your presentation up, so you can just tell me when you want to go forward.
Okay, if you move to the next slide, please. Going back a little history here, one of the things about the Caribbean, seeing massive migration, which we do have, we'll have to go back to this. One of the only ways to really see real numbers of migrants coming into the region in the fall is to use radar. And in the late 1960s and 1970s, there were a variety of radar studies that tracked the movement of birds from North America into the Caribbean. This is a photograph of one of those radar screens. It's a photograph of a radar screen on the island of Antigua. And there's a black blob here that's been put there to make the photograph easier to see. But what you can see on the radar screen are these little traces, these lines. Most of these lines are moving actually to the southeast. In this direction here, this would be north. And the scientists can sit at these screens and quantify the movement of these traces. And these represent birds, mostly relatively large birds, although warblers and other songbirds will show up on them. But this is the work of Tim Williams and his colleagues, as I note here, in 1977. And if you go to the next slide, please, you'll see in the next slide, there we go, you'll see that the autumn migration was measured by Williams and his colleagues at a number of different sites in North America as well as in the Caribbean. And here this diagram shows the locations of radar systems starting here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and Cape Cod, Massachusetts, Wallops Island, Virginia, here in Bermuda, and then in Miami, and then in Antigua, Barbados, and Tobago. And this is a summary of the work they did in the fall, sometime in the early 70s, where they quantified the migration of birds using those radar screens that I showed you. And they show here the direction of movement of the birds, sort of the average direction of nights with heavy or medium level flights. And what you see in this diagram here, up here, you'll see the birds are leaving North America in the fall, mostly moving in a southeasterly direction. So they're actually moving out to sea. They're not all coming down the coast as you might suspect, although some do and show up here in Miami and move to the southeast. But they head out this direction. Now, the individual arrows here are sightings of birds or groups of birds during this period from ships. This was recorded on the radar of those ships, and the arrows show the direction, the major direction of movements of those birds. And as you see, a little confusion up here, but as they get out over Bermuda, you'll see they're still heading here to the southeast as if they were going to go to North Africa, which is not shown on this graph, but it is certainly most peculiar. But what happens is, as they get further south, they then begin to shift and are blown into the Caribbean. What the birds are doing in fall migration is they're taking advantage of the cold fronts which come off of the continent. And these cold fronts have winds that are coming out of the north, or actually out of the northwest, and they give the birds a tailwind, and the birds take advantage of that. These are both shorebirds as well as songbirds, and even waterfowl and some herons and egrets. And they take advantage of the tailwind, and they're letting the winds push them in this direction. But as they get further south, the trade winds begin to come in. And as you may know, the trade winds are primarily coming out of the east. And the trade winds then push the birds into the Caribbean. And here you can see the vectors showing the movements over Antigua, Barbados, and then coming into the north coast of South America. So this is an overview of the migration. This is primarily September and October, roughly this period, and it shows the movement of these birds coming into at least the Eastern Caribbean. But you'll notice it's a long voyage over the ocean. Next slide, please. Now, this is a shot, another radar study in the fall, and it's a diagram showing the average movement of the birds coming in October into the island of Puerto Rico. And as you can see, most are coming out of either the north or the northeast onto or over the island. Now, there's a bare spot here, but that's primarily an issue related to the deflection of the radar by the mountains of the island. But the birds in the fall are coming in at this direction, and this is a diagram that was made around maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. So these birds are coming in at night and going either over, or some are landing on Puerto Rico. Now, most of them were, at least early in the year, early in September in particular, are mostly shorebirds, plovers and sandpipers. However, as the fall continues, as we get into October, most of these are passerine birds or songbirds. Next slide, please. In spring, the story is different. Our birds are coming out of the northeast, into the Caribbean, but when they leave from the Eastern Caribbean, at least, they are moving to the northwest, as if they're heading right up to the Florida Peninsula, which is the most direct route. And this is a diagram, again, same type of radar study, and each line showing the trajectory of migrant birds as they're moving north in the spring. This was from April, and it was 1 hour after sunset when these birds were taking off. Now, some of the birds here probably came from the Virgin Islands or Anguilla, British Virgin Islands, or American Virgin Islands to the east. But these birds here evidently came from the island of Puerto Rico, and now they're headed in north. So a different trajectory, but a fair number of birds are moving at that time of year. Next slide, please. And they're moving at about, roughly about, they're about a mile high or even higher. So when they're moving out over water, they will move and they'll be pretty high, so you're not likely to see them. So the radar allows you to see this type of movement. Now, more recently, and some of you may be familiar with this, there's been some exciting work done with Wimbrels, a large shorebird. It's a curlew, and these were studies that were done using satellite receivers and transmitters on the back of these birds, which transmit the position, latitude and longitude of these birds during migration. And the study summarized here by Smith and Watts and others is based on their studies in Virginia, where they captured Wimbrels at a site that they thought was an important stopover site, which they subsequently found was very, very important for the birds. And they put the radios on the birds, and these are the tracks of the movements of a fair number of Wimbrels. Their names are shown here. It's a small print, difficult to see, but the fact is all these lines show the movement. The overall story here is these birds on the East Coast are heading out to sea and then coming down here into the Eastern Caribbean and then Northern South America, Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guyana. And one of the birds, as shown here, was named Hope, which was a great name, and they were able to follow Hope for a fair number of years. They first captured her here at this site, Wallops Island in Virginia, and put the satellite device on the back of the bird, and the bird migrated north, this was spring, and up to Hudson's Bay, and then right up here to Alaska, and where it presumably bred in the McKenzie Delta. This is a very rich shorebird area. And then in the fall, cross Canada, again, past or over the Hudson's Bay, down out over New England, and then out over the Atlantic and down here to the island of St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. An amazing trip. And it made several trips back and forth, again, stopping at the same stopover site in Virginia and then going up here to Alaska to breed. And I was up in Alaska a year ago in June and saw a number of Wimbrels, and it was, to me, rather exciting to see these birds on the other side of their life. I mean, it's a remarkable journey, and you've got to figure that this has got to be a challenge. They've got to, of course, fuel up. Lisa mentioned how they look like flying footballs when they take off for migration. She's absolutely right. They're little piggies before they leave. In fact, they're even known to feed on fruit, as well as, of course, all sorts of invertebrates, but they just chow down and they take off and fly. But when they end up in the Caribbean, at least after full migration, they've lost a lot of weight. Next slide, please. Now, we can't put these satellite receivers or transmitters on small birds. So recently there have been some breakthrough in the technologies, and scientists have started using what are known as light level geolocators. And these are used to study migration in small birds. And this is an example, comes from the work of colleague and cooperator Nathan Cooper and Pete Mara and others. And they put on these light level geolocators, and here's an example of the size. This is a standard paperclip. It's not a big one, it's a standard one. And this is what it looks like. And this is how they fit it onto the back of the bird. And what this light level geolocator includes is a light sensor, an internal clock, a computer chip, and a battery. And what the light sensor does, it detects light, as the name suggests, and it projects out over the back here over the feathers. So you can detect sunrise and sunset and detect dawn and dusk. And it records the time of this sunset, sunrise, dawn and dusk in the computer chip. It also has the internal clock. So basically records that. And then it's all driven by a very tiny battery. So what this can do by using the light is determine the latitude and the longitude of the bird. So you can determine where the bird has gone. Now, the confidence intervals around the calculation of latitude and longitude are fairly wide. So you need a large sample of birds, but nonetheless, this little device can do it. It only weighs, in the case of the one for the Kirtland's Warbler, this only weighed 0.65 grams. So very, very small. And the battery lasts for over a year. Well, let's take a look at what the results, example the results look at in the next slide, please. And this is from Nathan Cooper's work with Pete Mara and others. And this is a diagram showing the relative probability of residency and migration route of one male Kirtland's Warbler. And what they did was they captured the bird in the breeding area. These birds breed, as Lisa mentioned, in jack pine habitat in Michigan, and some in Wisconsin and Ontario. They captured the male, they put on the geolocator, released it, and they were able to recapture the bird in the next breeding season. So that's one of the downsides of this method. You have to capture the bird to retrieve your geolocator and download all the information onto your computer. Obviously, you can't do that for all birds. Some of the birds disappear, so you need a large sample to be able to do this. Anyway, this bird left in the fall. They captured at the end of the breeding season, took off. The dashed line shows the areas where it migrated, again with, as I mentioned, wide confidence intervals, but this is a good approximation. And then it came down, left the coast of North America and into the Bahamas archipelago, wintering primarily in the central Bahamas. And the dark shown here is the highest probability of detection, and then the lighter colors or the warmer colors, lower probabilities of the bird being found. So this is the most likely area, and this is where the bird spent its winter. And as Lisa mentioned, these really are Caribbean birds. Kirtland's Warblers spend 7 months or even more in the Bahamas, as opposed to the rest of the year in their breeding grounds, so they're here for quite a while. But in April, they do leave, and this bird left and flew over to Florida, and actually showed up on the west coast of Florida, near probably Naples, and then moved north up to the breeding ground. So what it showed was what we would call a loop migration, further east coming down and further west going up. And this makes sense when you think about the prevailing winds going down. They're getting tailwinds, they're getting blown by those cold fronts on those winds out of the west or the northwest. Whereas in the spring, when they're moving north, they take advantage of those winds coming out of the south, and they're often coming out of the the southeast. And so that helps to push them north. Now they do stop and do refuel, and it may take the birds maybe 3 weeks to complete this migration. And we've looked at that, and we are very interested in the important stopover sites for the warbler, because those are areas that, of course, we'd want to focus conservation on, efforts on, as well as, of course, the efforts on the wintering grounds where they do spend 7 months of the year. Next slide, please. Well, one other example of using one of these geolocators is one of those oh wow stories. This is a record holder. These are Blackpool Warblers, and they have an astonishing migration, or at least an astonishing overwater migration, and nonstop, obviously, because these are small warblers. They wouldn't last in the water very long out at sea, so they've got to hit land. And this is a study by De Luca and his colleagues, where they captured some birds in New England, put on those geolocators, and they show the movement of the birds in the fall. And they show an example of a straight line migration. It's probably longer. These lines represent the minimal distances. If they're doing what the satellite data suggests, they're actually going out going out to the east and then coming back to the west. But nonetheless, we're talking about an open water flight of about 1,500 miles, and this is done in about three days by a songbird of 12 grams. And it is one of the longest overwater flights by a small bird. There are some birds, of course, larger birds, curlews in particular, as well as godwits that can fly from Alaska all the way down to Hawaii or even to New Zealand. But those birds are many, many times larger. So this is a pretty phenomenal flight. The bird will stop in Puerto Rico, as some of the examples show here, or elsewhere in the Greater Antilles. However, there is some evidence that they can, in fact, make it all the way to Venezuela in one continuous flight. So that's a pretty remarkable flight. So you got to ask yourself, well, how do they do that? Next slide, please. And Lisa alluded to that by the importance of fat. And here are a couple of issues, examples of the exertion required for a nonstop flight from Canada to the Caribbean. Let's take the black-bellied plover, a shorebird that's common throughout the region during the winter months, and actually some spend the summer months, non-breeders, in the Caribbean, but they breed in northern Canada and Alaska, and they can make an open water flight of 2,000 miles, and the equivalent of a human doing that in terms of exertion is, imagine this, a human running 4-minute miles for 80 hours. All right, I mean, 4-minute mile is a respectable speed for a human. Now imagine doing that for 80 hours. That's what this bird does. All right, it's doing this for 2.5 days nonstop. They're reasonably fast, much faster than the songbirds. So they move at a good clip. But nonetheless, imagine the exertion required and the energy required. The Blackpool Warbler, which I just mentioned to you, somebody has calculated that the exertion is equivalent to 720 miles per gallon if using gasoline for the migration, or that's 306 100 kilometers per liter. That's phenomenal mileage. So these birds are really burning up fat, and fat is a very efficient fuel. Well, that of course means they've got to eat a lot, and they do pig out before their migration. So food is a crucial issue, no surprise. Next slide, please.
And while I'm changing the slide, Joe, I'm going to tell you that you're just about out of time.
Okay, that's all right. We're at the end. Migrants experience a number of threats that vary throughout their annual cycle. And this is what makes conservation for migrants so very difficult. Their annual cycle is complex because they're moving all over the place. And this is an example, the annual cycle from temperate breeding season to the tropical wintering grounds with migration in between. And I think you all know by now the major stresses facing these birds, as with other birds, non-migrants too, but imagine this occurring at any one of these stages or all of them: habitat loss, predation, infrastructure collisions, and finally climate change. And with that, I thank you.
That was quick. Good. Thank you so much. That was fascinating, Joe. I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to go on. And Leo, you are up next. We did a short introduction at the beginning, Leo. So you can share your own slides, and I'm going to, Leo is a wonderful researcher and professor, and he did a study in Jamaica, which I'll let him go forward. Leo, we are pushing our time a little bit, so just to be aware of that. And I believe you're muted. You are muted.
It won't allow me to share a video. I'm not sure why.
Did you have a video or a presentation?
All right, no worries, but you can see my slides, hopefully.
Yes, can definitely see your slide.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and it's such a privilege to be contributing to this very important event today. The title of my presentation is What are the effects of knowledge acquisition, attitudes, and behavior interventions about biodiversity? So what affects knowledge acquisition, attitudes, and behavior interventions? And for this, I'm going to be presenting data from 13 Jamaican high schools. This work was done through Birds Caribbean in collaboration with the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center. And as you can see on the bottom, my collaborators were Luke Powell, Lisa Sorensen, Lorraine Cook, and Livingston White from the University of West Indies, and Gary Winkle and Pete Mara. Pete Mara is, of course, from the Smithsonian. So what were we trying to look at in this Caribbean population? Well, first of all, we do a lot of amazing education work. We all love it so much. But the reality of it is that we know really very little about the effects and the long-term effects of education work. And most of what we do in terms of evaluation is pre and post. The analysis of education programs usually neglects looking at what happens long-term in terms of how much is retained for knowledge, how our meanings and the values of birds and nature changed over time, whether or not these meanings are incorporated in local culture, and also the impacts of social variables. These things like, age, is the population male or female? Are they rich and poor? Are they more privileged or less privileged, etc.? And also, one of the reasons why this has been neglected is that the statistics for doing it sometimes can be very, very onerous for long-term study designs. In our study, we looked at approximately 450 students from 13 high schools. We pulled randomly about 30 students per school. Of the 13 high schools that participated, 7 were randomly assigned to an experimental group. That means they did our workshops and our field trips, and 6 schools were randomly assigned to a control group. We used both qualitative and quantitative interviewing then to assess either before they entered our program and over the next few years, how their attitudes, knowledge, and behavior intentions changed. So what was it like? Well, our workshops were based on the Caribbean Bird Sleuth program. And in this picture, you can actually see Lisa interacting with the respondents or school children. This particular school is Black River High School. And they were engaged through direct outdoor experiences, hands-on observation and discovery, play-based learning, involved in helping to collect data and group games and discussions. They also spent time with us in the field, bird watching and seeing birds banded for scientific study. In this picture, we can see Dr. Hurlitz Davis showing this group of very enthusiastic young ladies, as you can see, Caribbean dove. So very briefly, I just want to give you a sense of what were the knowledge awareness trends that we found over the 3+ years, almost 4 years, and the attitudinal trends. So at time one, before anybody joined our program, and I recall that this was 450 kids, you see that when we asked how many types of birds are found only in Jamaica, most people thought there was only one. And this one bird they thought was the national bird, the doctor bird, as Jamaicans call it. However, 6 weeks after participating in our program, you can see that there's a split. Some people still think it's one, which are those in our control group disproportionately. But there's a large group that now understand that there's somewhere between 27, 28, 29, 30, or 31 birds, depending on whether you're including the 2 extinct birds. It's either 28 or 30, that now know that there are a lot more endemic birds on Jamaica. And what you can see in these 2 graphs below is that there is some atrophication with time. So after a year, some people are forgetting. And after 3.5 years, you can again see that there's still some atrophication, but many students still know that there's approximately 30 birds on Jamaica. So let's look at the some types of birds, and I'm paying attention here in this and the next slide, migrants. So this is 3 years after we took them on the experimental group on their workshop and bird watching banding field trip. And this student is identifying some birds that she can see around her school and home. American redstart, orange quit, a Jamaican endemic, the Jamaican toady. So really amazing that 3.5 years later, they can by name recognize birds. Obviously, the intervention was meaningful for them. But my question then is, well, was it meaningful, and is this knowledge and awareness changing for everybody? And the answer for that is no. Our control group, as you can see in this analysis of how many students can name at least one neotropical migrant bird 3.5 years later. Well, nobody in our control group knows anything about migrants at all. Our experimental group has learned, but there's a very big difference between the recollection or learning or awareness 3 years out of the boys and the girls. Girls are more than twice as likely to be able to name, using the standard English name, a neotropical migrant 3.5 years later. Let's dig into this a little bit more. How about the endemics? And here again, I am looking at the differences between boys and girls and the interaction, which was significant in these cases, between their participation in the control group and the experimental group. Here again, the girls are outperforming the boys. In red, you can see this graph. Who can name the endemic birds on Jamaica? It's disproportionately the girls. Joe, I threw this in just because of you and banana quits, but if we look at just one species in terms of banana quits, you can see who can name a banana quit, one of the most common species on Jamaica and in the Caribbean. And again, girls are outperforming the boys significantly. However, when you look across all the species, there's one group of birds that the boys are standing out for, and these are the game birds. White-crowned pigeon, Zenaida dove, the mourning dove, all of these birds, the boys are the ones who are disproportionately showing this knowledge. We did a fact analysis where for the 30 questions that we used to gauge knowledge and attitudes, we condensed these into 4 factors: support and interest in bird conservation, value of birds, acceptability and legality of birds, of the killing and capture of birds, and interest in science. In other words, these were 4 things that stood out across the 4 periods, pre and the 1, 2, and 3 years, that the students were showing very significant changes across. I'm going to share this one here in terms of how did they change in terms of how they saw the acceptability and legality of killing and capturing birds. The experimental group that participated in our workshop and field trip obviously has learned a lot, and they are very much at this point against the killing and capturing of birds. What I also then want to point out is that it's the girls disproportionately who are outraged about killing birds, capturing parrots, keeping birds in cages, and that these things are illegal and should not be done. In this slide, I apologize for all the numbers, but it was just the best way because there were so many significant interactions. In this analysis, we're looking at who wants to see more bird education in school. Gender is significant. Traditional versus non-traditional. This means that if you're going to an elite school, traditional school, or a trade school, a non-traditional school, the interaction between gender and whether or not you were in the control or experimental group, and of course, time. And the takeaway from these data here is that girls, gender, and girls who participated in our program were very heavily impacted and wanted to have more education in school, much more, significantly much more relative to boys. And also whether or not you were going to a kind of a rich school, you were kind of middle class, or whether you were going to a poorer school, you were working class, also had very important implications. So in my final slide, I just want to point out that the key things that 450 kids, same programs, but there were differences in the experiences. And some of this was tied to student gender and also their socioeconomic backgrounds. We therefore need to pay more attention to these issues of privilege and gender when we're thinking about doing environmental education, because even on a small island, what people are hearing and accepting and running with, there might be differences based on these within group differences. We need to look more deeply at long-term effects. And if we're really interested in changing behaviors, we need to speak more carefully and think more carefully about these nuances in our receiving populations and how our interventions, education interventions, should be modified to address these differences. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leo. Always fascinated to hear about that project. Anthony Levesque, you are next, and we'll wrap up with Eric and then open it up for any discussion and questions.
Okay, as you know, English is not my first language, so I need to have my presentation.
Yes.
And to read in the same time. So how can I do it?
Oh, so you need to read the slides?
Yes, I have some comments, but you are not supposed to see them. So perhaps you can show my presentation.
So I don't have your presentation, do I?
Okay.
You need to show your presentation, and then you might just escape out of full window and put it up side by side.
Mm-hmm.
If that would work. I don't have another suggestion for that unless someone else does.
I mean, I could go now, and then Anthony could send you his presentation.
No, I sent it. You received it by email, but perhaps it's too late. I don't know. I know Lisa received and you were copied.
I have, if you want me to share my screen.
Let me check. Let me look. Or yeah, Lisa, if you want to share your screen, you can go on and share his presentation.
Yeah, that'll work.
I'm just starting it up, and I will share my screen, and then Anthony can talk.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Sure. Share screen.
Anthony, I can't believe you in perfect in English yet. So let's go.
Yeah.
Okay, are you seeing the slide?
Yes, they are up. Thank
Okay.
you.
Sure.
It's okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Mhm.
Okay, so I'm not sure if, where are you, Lisa? Okay. So next
Just hit
slide.
next. Yep,
Next,
just next when you're
please.
ready.
Yes, next. So the Lesser Antilles are situated in the eastern part of the Caribbean, from Anguilla in the north to Grenada in the south. And in the middle, you can find islands like Guadeloupe, Dominica, Martinique in the center. And you have Barbados in the east, slightly outside the bow. There is about 700 kilometers from north to south. Next, please. You should see a barn swallow, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the Caribbean homes over 700 species, and about 171 are endemics of the region. 347 are resident, and especially for today, the most interested numbers is the numbers of visitors. So we have about 334 species recorded so far, plus 145 considered as vagrants. Among the visitors, only 100 are regular visitors of the Lesser Antilles. The barn swallow is a typical and well-known migratory species in the region. Nesting in North America, it winters mainly in South America, but some good numbers can stay wintering in the region. Next, please. Warblers are also famous because these tiny birds are so colorful. This American redstart is the most common warbler species in the Lesser Antilles. They arrive in general in September and live as late as April or May. Next, please. This Blackpool Warbler is one of the very rare species that could be found in higher numbers in the Lesser Antilles than in the rest of the Caribbean, because it uses an Atlantic migration. This is the Atlantic flyway between North America and Venezuela, where it spends the non-breeding season. Next, please. The group with the higher number of species is, with no doubt, the Shorebirds family, with over 50 species recorded in the Lesser Antilles. Here, the lesser yellowlegs is well known, especially in Guadeloupe, Martinique, and Barbados, because it's a game species. People shoot them for sports, mainly. Next, please. The semi-palmated sandpiper is the most common species of most common birds of every shorebirds, because about 50% of all shorebirds belong to this species. Next, please. Shorebirds are really numerous during the fall migration, especially on beaches, salt pond, on every kind of wetlands. They are very numerous and easy to see compared to warblers, for example. Next, please. Even if we have far less bird species compared to Lucayan Archipelago or the Greater Antilles, we can make them jealous because almost every year we can discover incredible species from the old world. Here is a squawko heron. It was a new species for the Caribbean and North America, found in Guadeloupe in November 2018. Next, please. Sadly, migratory species as resident species, but perhaps even more, face many threats during their incredible trip. Introduced species, habitat destruction, pollution, climate change, hunting, etc. are real threats for the migratory species. Next, please. But let's stay positive. Together, let's get to know our birds better to better preserve them. Next. Stay safe with Birds Caribbean. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you so much. That was great. I love the mask too. That's perfect. And Eric, you are last but not least. Would you like me to put up your slide or do you want to run it yourself?
I will try and share it myself.
Okay.
I'll probably mess up, but I'm not worried about being embarrassed, as everyone in this group knows. So, and can you see it?
No, I see a document.
Oh, national parks and conservation.
No, I don't see your slideshow.
I'm screen sharing, it says. Yeah.
I think you've selected something else. When you go to screen share, you need to have your slide presentation open on your desktop and then select
that's what I was doing. Check again.
Yeah, that's not it. Do you want to close? That's a Word document.
No, it says that I'm sharing my PowerPoint presentation.
Well, but what you selected is actually our letter to you to be a presenter.
No, I don't have that letter.
Sue.
No, that's.
I think I'm still screen sharing. How do I turn that off? I'm not seeing it in my.
Oh, that's what's going on.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm trying to.
I didn't realize you were still up. Thank you. Yeah, you need to go on and stop share.
Okay, I'm not seeing.
Go to the. There should be a tab that says stop share. Let me see if I can take it away from you.
Yeah,
Lisa's just stealing my glory as usual.
I tell you, what is that about?
Yeah, she does it all the time. But while we're figuring that out, I'm basically talking about so we can stay on target. I'm talking about national parks and protected areas and the importance, between birds, so national parks and birds, conservation connections. And you guys can let me know when you're seeing my screen. I work for the Bahamas National Trust. I am the executive director, and we manage the national park system in the Bahamas. Are we still not seeing my screen?
Well, so what I did was I shared mine. I'm not able to tell though if it is showing up.
It is showing up.
My slide is showing up. Okay, yeah. Eric, let's keep it up and I'll move the slides for you. How does that sound?
I don't know. Why can't I just share my screen?
Well, let me, if I stop the share, I think we're going to go back to Lisa's.
Okay, I stopped sharing. I stopped sharing, so I think we're good.
Okay, so do you want me to let you put it up, Eric?
Yeah, let me just get it correctly.
Okay, you go for it now. There you go.
All right, so this is who we are. We're the National Park Service of the Bahamas. We're fairly unique. We are a membership-based organization, nonprofit. We are advisors to government, etc. And we spend a lot of time as advocates for conservation. And we trying to get this moved. All right, here you go. So by the numbers, we are 32 national parks currently, 70 staff across 7 islands. The Bahamas is a fairly large area, so it's important for bird conservation in the Americas, both for local birds as well as for migrants. And so basically, these national parks are important for bird conservation. This is our network across the Bahamas. The Bahamas is just east of Florida and just north of Cuba. So Some people do not consider as a part of the Caribbean because the Caribbean Sea does not actually touch the Bahamas, but we are certainly geopolitically part of the Caribbean region. Our parks are created for people, but indeed a number of our national parks are created for specifically for birds. The Inaugural National Park, which is nearly 60 years old, like the BNT. We're 60 years old. The Inaugural National Park was created shortly after, but that park was created specifically for the Caribbean flamingo, to protect the Caribbean flamingo, which was on the brink of extinction, and working closely with Audubon back then and any number of other historical organizations. The Inaugural National Park was created, huge conservation success. Now we have birds that are on other islands in the Bahamas as a result of the work that we did in Inaugural. So that national park has proven absolutely 100% that if you protect the habitat and you manage a species, you can have a great conservation success. The Abaco National Park was created to protect the Abaco parrot, which again, that bird was in serious problem, and the park was created to have a focused effort on its conservation. And since 1992, we've been doing active management and research, including predator control. That species has shown a great rebound, and is now, we're seeing Bahama parrots moving across the island of Abaco, and repopulating areas which folks feel it was their historic range across that island. The Jolta Keys National Park was a national park created for the piping plover. And as a result of our research with Audubon and Fish and Wildlife. So these are just 3 examples of national parks created specifically for birds. And of course, there are any number of other national parks created for other reasons, but having these protected areas well managed means, of course, that you have intact both marine and terrestrial habitat for whether it's terrestrial birds or seabirds, to be able to positively impact their conservation. National parks are really good places for research, and our team has worked closely with the U.S. Forest Service and the Nature Conservancy on, Joe talked about the Curtin's Warbler project, and that was a great collaboration. Hopefully, going to lead to some areas being protected on some of the islands where we're finding this bird. We talked about the piping plover and the research that we did with National Audubon and Fish and Wildlife, and also partnerships with the American Bird Conservancy on studying the single island endemic, the Bahama Oriole, as well as working on the islands of Abaco and Grand Bahama to assess bird populations after hurricanes. So the national parks provided the opportunities for our staff to be trained and therefore be able to participate in these research projects. Building capacity is also an important part of what we've been able to do through these partnerships. And I want to definitely acknowledge Joe and Joe Wonderly and Dave Hewitt for the work that they did there. Because, for us as an organization, especially having the capacity to do this work ourselves is really very important. We like to work closely with international organizations, regional organizations, but building that national capacity is really very important. And as a result of that capacity that has been built, Now we have our team within the organization working within our national parks. Here we have 3 of our staff members. Mark is in Abaco. Giselle is shown here at the retreat. Scott, well known to all the folks from Birds Caribbean, is shown here at the primeval forest. So building that capacity is really important for the organization, because having built that capacity, now we're able to come back, and these folks who have been trained through this collaboration can now go ahead and do the work that we need to do with respect to monitoring in our national parks. National parks also, as a result of the capacity that we've built, provides ecotourism opportunities. So here we have an example of guides who were trained, nature tour guides, bird guides on 2 islands in particular, but it's basically creating an economy, a local economy for local people built around birds. But again, building that capacity was really important. National parks are really great places where these birders are going to find the birds that are protected in the habitat, and therefore having quality birding experiences. And in seeking to keep us all on time, that's the last slide that I have. And I thank the organizers. I really thank Joe and Dave for all the work they've done in the Bahamas. Thank you, Birds Caribbean, one of my most favorite nonprofit conservation organizations, and I encourage all of you to support Birds Caribbean. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. What I'm going to have everyone do is turn on your cameras. So if we could have all the panelists turn on your cameras, and then open it up for any questions and conversation about conservation in the Caribbean. And I think I'm going to start it off with just a question about, the Caribbean region is so fascinating because it represents so many different cultures, so many different countries, and in a large area from, Florida area all the way down to, Venezuela. So can you speak, or someone speak about how the Caribbean region, do you coordinate any conservation efforts among the islands? What are some of the challenges and what are some of the successes of working across such a diverse area?
So I would be happy to tackle. I think you turned my camera off and you need to turn me back on. That's what it tells me. Okay, yes, thank you.
And I might have done that to Leo too. I'm sorry, Leo. There you go. Leo, you can come back on also. Thank you.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'll take a stab at that question. Birds Caribbean is a regional organization. So that is our mission, is to coordinate and network and work with partners and connect all of us, because we're all facing the same challenges and conservation issues in the region. And so when we work together on regional projects and programs and learn from each other, we found that that's the best approach. And, every NGO and government has their own projects and programs that they're doing, which is fantastic. But what we try to do is to help build capacity, to help partners out with, developing these programs, and then also participating in regional programs. So one example would be the Caribbean Waterbird Census program. And we started that about 11 years ago. And over the years, we've built up participation in the program. We have a regional count in the wintertime, and then we encourage people to count year round, including this time of year, fall and spring migration especially. And folks have been stepping up. They've been going out and doing counts, and we've learned so much about migratory birds from these counts. We're getting really valuable data on where birds are wintering, filling in knowledge gaps about what are the most important sites for shorebirds and water birds, and where's the biggest diversity, where are the biggest numbers, what sites need protection, what are the threats. So that's one example. And we've got some other regional programs where we try to just work together, like Birds Sleuth Caribbean, the Caribbean Birding Trail. These are all initiatives where when we work together, we can be stronger and learn from each other.
Thank you, Lisa. Anyone else? have some thoughts about that? Does it work? Can you describe any way that it functions differently on the islands, just given the distance and, again, the diversity of the islands, the language is spoken?
Yeah, that's a challenge. There's so many different countries and cultures and languages. And so, we find ways to make it work. We get together for an international conference every 2 years, which you're all invited to. They're just really a lot of fun and so interesting. We do our best to provide like simultaneous translation. We have a journal that we publish, and we provide the abstracts in 3 languages. So we try to do as much as we can to facilitate those exchanges, but we really celebrate the diversity, not only of our birds, but of our people. And so we move around from island to island with our conferences, and every local culture and habitat and nature is different in every island. So it's just so much fun to learn from each other. And every country is proud to show off the birds that they have. Like Anthony was bragging about his heron, and Eric is lucky to have the Kirtland's Warbler and the piping plover, in the Bahamas. But every island has something special to share. So we celebrate all the diversity of both the islands and the people that are working to conserve the islands. And we take a lot of inspiration from each other, because it's hard. I know that people feel sometimes isolated, like they're all alone. But I think that when we come together and we share, then we get energized and inspired to continue on.
When you say that every island is unique and special, that's certainly true. Are there any challenges that are unique to certain islands? Or what would some of those be?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. So across the region, of course, you have different countries, you have different government administrations. You have some countries with universities, so you have good direct research, etc. So you're going to find unique situations there. I think funding is a challenge across the region. So I find, I've run into projects across the region that I've looked at and go, wow, I wish I was rich to be able to go and make a $50,000 gift or $100,000 gift, because it's such an incredible idea. I knew that if that idea was pitched somewhere else in an economy that probably had better philanthropy, that you'd really push some stuff. I've seen stuff in places like Cuba, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, etc. So funding is always a challenge. One of the strengths of Birds Caribbean is that it brings the experiences of stronger organizations, and I would very humbly say that BNT is a fairly strong, large organization, and we have certainly used what we have and the benefits that we've been given to support, projects, throughout the region. But I would say funding is something that is always a challenge and makes it difficult to do some things on some islands that might be able to be pushed further ahead on others.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have a comment related to that?
Well, I'd like to make a comment about diversity islands beyond the cultural issues, which are non-trivial, but also economic development. We have islands that are quite urbanized, and that's very different than islands that still have a fairly heavy agricultural economy, and that does make a difference in terms of doing conservation. And so, and you have a country like the Bahamas, as Eric well knows, population centers are really two main islands, and then you've got a whole archipelago full of islands with relatively few people, and that's a very different story than what you might have in Dominica or what you might have in Grenada. So those do present challenges. I think what Birds Caribbean has done well is, I think Birds Caribbean has not been threatening to local organizations. And I think it's the mindset that the organization has had from inception, that this is an island organization. And we're all in this together, and we we feel your pain, and we want to work with you, and we want to know how best to work with you. And the fact that we get together every 2 years, we talk about all these things and we communicate with each other. And I think that's a very special factor. And I've worked throughout Central America and South America, and I've never seen it, that sort of level of conservation crossing territory boundaries. And so I think that is a real difference and a real strength. You know, having our regular meetings and communicating with all sorts of folks. We're constantly looking for new talent on different islands and encourage them to participate. And I think that's a strength of the organization.
Thank you, Joe. Anyone else like to comment on that?
Well said, Joe. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, we have an amazing network of partners and people that we work with. So,
oh yes, that's definitely true. It's such a wonderful thing. The whole program and working with all of the islands, and that's what makes, I think, the meetings so spectacular, is that energy and just people from so many different places, the different languages. It's a lot of fun. So it's a wonderful gathering, like you said, every 2 years. What do you see as being your goals and focuses for the next coming 5 years for bird conservation?
Eric, you want to talk about the Bahamas?
Oh, I mean, so I mean, for the Bahamas, it's it is to see the protected areas managed effectively. It's to see better management of hunting. It's to see development more progressively managed, and we're fortunate in that. We had some really powerful modernized legislation recently created in the Bahamas. We now have a Department of Environment and Planning. So coupled with good protected area management, the management of issues like proper management of the management of issues like hunting, and also the effective regulation of development. That's what I'm hoping can happen in the Bahamas, because, oftentimes those of us that work in the field of conservation get viewed as being anti-development, anti-tourism, anti-whatever. Absolutely not. We're an important part of the whole picture. And for the Bahamas, I just want to make sure that you have all of the elements that are happening: national parks, good environmental regulation. I'd love to see more research happening at the University of the Bahamas, etc. And most importantly, I would like to see strengthened collaboration across the region. I've been involved with Birds Caribbean, not as long as Joe's 100 years, but I know that there are some really talented, dedicated researchers, conservation professionals across this region. And if we could find a way to do a better job, and also environmental educators, if we could find a better way of harnessing this network, then we could have an impact across more of our islands. So, yeah.
Any other comments? Thank you, Eric. Anthony? Oops, you're muted, Anthony.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I would say, as Eric, the problem of shorebird hunting it's really an issue in the French West Indies. For the 5 years, I would say that this is to make this activity more sustainable. Oh, connection, you can hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I would say that actually this activity is not sustainable. So this is really something we would like to work on. Guadeloupe and Martinique, and perhaps Barbados too. So shorebirds are really a threatened group, and we need to work on this group, especially in the French West Indies and Barbados.
And I know that hunting, Anthony, is it's something that is traditional there. Is that correct? And
yes,
so what are the
really.
challenges with changing that mindset there so that you can change that behavior? In
Guadeloupe, since perhaps you remember the story of Machi and Goshen, two famous rimbrels that were studying with how do you say, GPS, geolocator system, and they were shot in Guadeloupe. And since, especially in Guadeloupe, they set up some bag limits. They deleted some day to it's free of hunting during some days of the week. And actually, it sounds that the Federation wants to stop everything and want to hunt like in the past, every day, no bag limit. So we need to continue to work with them. It's not easy. It's really not easy. And Martinique is doing almost anything, actually. So we have a lot to do with both Guadeloupe and Martinique. It sounds the situation is a little better in Barbados, but we still have a lot to do in Guadeloupe and Martinique.
Yeah. Thanks, Anthony. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'll just add on to what Eric and Anthony pointed out. Yeah, I think as a region, we need to continue to work together and learn from each other. And we're seeing sort of the fruits of all that work, coming to pass all the time. So for example, the Caribbean Waterbird Census led to the creation of the second Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network site in Bonaire. We spent like 4 or 5 years doing intensive surveys on the Cargill salt ponds and discovered, tens of thousands of birds there that it was not on anybody's radar. And shorebirds, of course, as a group have been declining across the Americas. So it was really important to do more work with the Caribbean Waterbird Census to find important shorebird sites. So that's our first wisdom site. We have many more that we think qualify. So now we're going to be following up, what we've learned from the CWC to declare other sites as wizard sites. And then what we find is that as we work with people, this is just being an example, working with Cargill salt ponds, at first they were a little bit suspicious about who we were and what we wanted to do and didn't want us on the property. And now we're good friends and they are funding us to build infrastructure for bird tourism on Bonaire. So we just got nice funding to develop 6 sites with bird observation platforms and signage. And so you just, when you work together with people and you collaborate, it can have lots of positive benefits. So we're going to just continue to try to work with our partners and build on the successes and on the relationships and trust that we're building over time to make good things happen. And that's really
wonderful. Important. Yeah, that's great. That's great news. A last question. With anticipated increases in hurricanes that are of great strength, how are the islands preparing for that, both for the people, but also for habitat? What can be done to help protect habitat in light of this anticipated potential dangers from hurricanes and also its effect on the people of the islands?
Eric, what are you doing in the Bahamas?
No, I mean, it's hardly anything you can do to protect habitats. I think we can help to protect nature by not destroying things like mangroves, etc. So keeping habitats intact. So that, I guess, if we keep more habitats intact, we know that intact habitats are more resilient. There are more trees for birds to shelter. There's more food after hurricanes. So that's what I would say, is that we have to keep more habitats intact, have development that is more bird friendly, climate smart, climate friendly. A storm like Hurricane Darien, I don't know what is anything you can do, but what we're finding is that intact habitats are the ones that will come back more quickly.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Like in Dominica, they've got a lot of fairly pristine forest. A good portion of the island is protected in parks and forests. And so even though they were very badly hit by Maria, the parrots, you know, they suffered some mortality, but they can recover when that habitat is there. You know, the trees go back, the plants rebloom again. Same thing in Barbuda. Irma went over that island, and we thought the Barbuda warbler, that little tiny endemic warbler that's there, must have been, you know, decimated. We weren't even sure if we were going to find any. And 2 years later, the population's pretty much bounced back to what it was. And again, because we think it's the pristine habitat that's available to the bird, that gives it the opportunity to bounce back. You know, it was able to hunker down, and it didn't get flooded. That was one thing that was different from the Bahamas, where there was so much flooding. You know, the salt water really kills trees. But again, yeah, like as Eric said, you know, protecting the coastline with mangroves. Do not cut down your mangroves. You know, they should be off limits, period. And unfortunately, that's not the case. There's still lots of development and destruction of nature, you know, cutting down our trees, which then exposes the soil, and you get erosion, and then it runs off into the sea, and it kills the seagrass beds and the coral reefs. So, you know, it's all connected, and protecting nature is super important.
Yeah, it is all connected. Thanks, Lisa. Any other comments related to that topic?
In relation to that, I think one thing which is going to help in the future in the Caribbean is institutionalizing more payment for ecosystem services. One of the problems that the Caribbean has faced is that the tourism industry, including cruise ships, have resisted having any kind of thing perceived as a tax that goes to the environment. You know, but, you know, these millions and millions of people jumping onto our piers every year and jumping into our coastal waters are having a very big impact. And we also need to find a way to insist that, be it tourism and elsewhere, that these funds, mechanisms are in place that, you know, I'm very sick and tired, to be honest, when somebody tells me, like, you know, let's go on the beach and pick up trash, and let's go plant the mangrove seedlings. My time is valuable. You know, why should I be picking up other people's trash and doing this stuff for free? We need to have mechanisms where there are funds available, creating green jobs where people are being trained, where local communities have incentives to be part of these programs to replant coral. We know this can be done. Replant mangroves. And so that there are not only the feel-goods privilege incentives of going to do this on a weekend once or twice a year, but this is something which is structured, is institutionalized, and there's a way to pay for it and to create jobs around this. I think this would create significant headroads. You know, all these airlines flying in, you know, there should be $1 from everybody who lands at our international airport that goes to a kitty that pays for the preservation of mangroves, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is absolutely essential. And if we're really invested so much in tourism, which there's no indication that we won't be for the near future in terms of our economies, that this is absolutely a priority.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, Leo. And in terms of that tourism, what kind of information is there about the amount of travel that is to the Caribbean for tourism purposes?
There's a lot. There've been a lot of economic studies on it, and Leo has an excellent point that the sad thing about it, a tax which would benefit the environment, which we'd all love to see, and St. Lucia, of course, has tried this with a fee in their national forests or parks. And government saw that fee and felt that they should make the decision as to where the money should go. And this, of course, is a sad reality. And having it earmarked specifically for the environment, which is absolutely we want to do. The question is how to keep government from saying, oh, well, we've got this fund here. Puerto Rico has very high dockage fees, for example, for the cruise ship that come into the island, but we sure don't see that money going into recursos naturales or any of the environmental groups. So that's the unfortunate reality that it may not be that grim on all islands, but it's certainly a reality in a lot of them. And the question is how to engineer that and convince the government that, hey, we want some payback. The tourism industry has externalities, and why should that come out of the taxpayer's pocket? That should come out of the pocket of the users of that environment, which are the tourists. But getting that message across, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Keep at it.
Yeah. Yeah, and and even from bird watchers' point of view, there have been a lot of efforts to actually get funding from bird watchers for non-game species, and that's something we've been working on for a long time, and how to do that. So, any other comments related to tourism?
Yep, I just wanted to say on Joe's point that there's a lot of red tape in green. Unfortunately, be it the Green Fund on Trinidad, like lots of paperwork, lots of wait time, lots of uncertainty, just being able to access funds for very meaningful, well-needed work. So Joe is absolutely right. One of the challenges is to kind of how to streamline these mechanisms. One group which is working out of Belize called the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. I don't know how many of you have heard of it, but they've been trying to get around some of this, for example, to be able to, for example, within 48 hours of a hurricane hitting an island, to release money that's available to communities. I think it's going to be very important for us to kind of educate ourselves whether or not some of those funds can be used for environmental issues, or if is it just for people flooded out of their homes kind of stuff. But they've been doing amazing work.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do, those of us who don't live on islands do think of those of you who do, and worry about everyone, the people, the birds, all the other animals. So, and in terms of tourism, yes, I think that's a case everywhere, actually, with tourism and taking those funds for the resources that people are going to enjoy and using it for the protection of those. So I hope that we can come to some good solutions and good ideas for ways to tap into those funds for the benefit of habitat. Any other comments anyone would like to make before we close the session?
One comment just to close, going back to the points in terms of for the future. One thing which I think that all of us agree on and are supportive of is the idea of having more of our conservation professionals properly educated. One of the things that the Caribbean does suffer from is a brain drain, where that, it's cleaning toilets and restaurants in Miami or New York pays a lot more than working for many conservation jobs. And we're at the place where many of our forestry departments, that generation of foresters that were educated, Joe, I'm not talking about you, but I mean, they in the Lesser Antilles, etc., are retiring. And there is not that influx of the 20-year-olds and the 30-year-olds who are then heading off to their graduate programs and then coming home to serve their governments in the forestry departments and in their NGOs. And without that, they're not going to stay. The pastures outside of the Caribbean are too green if we don't provide these kind of connections. People coming home to reliable jobs and coming home with the skills and degrees and education of what to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Leah.
I think that's a great point, Leo. You know, we need more jobs in the environmental conservation, wildlife management field. And, you know, I guess it's largely up to the governments and then to some extent the NGOs, but they need to provide more of those jobs. The universities need to offer classes so that students can learn. You train that next generation. You know, we as an organization try to mentor people and give opportunities and things like that, but it's not enough. And, you know, just generally, there's just not enough of a conservation ethic. And so that's why events like World Migratory Bird Day and Caribbean Endemic Bird Festival and education programs are so important. You just got to keep engaging people and try to change the culture so that people see the value and the importance of nature and the environment. And so that's kind of a lot of what we try to do. And I know that the BNT and all of you are then, of course, involved in these kinds of efforts as well. They're just vital. Got to change people's awareness and they're caring for to be stewards of nature. It's so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I guess we're at our last minute here. So that actually sparked some more questions when you talked about conservation ethic and conservation awareness, but I don't think we have time to get into that. But I think that's a critical topic. And I'm sure it varies across the region, just like it does anywhere else. So I want to thank you all for being on this panel discussion. That was fascinating information, and I think you know, a lot of people aren't aware of the amazing migrations that birds make, that they do come across the Caribbean, and the importance of the Caribbean as, you know, wintering and stopover sites for migratory birds. So really appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us today, and hope you can stay on later. We'll be announcing the awards for Caribbean educators. And so our Caribbean coordinator, Dr. Shelda Diaz, will be giving those awards to educators in the Caribbean region, which is one way we hope to motivate participation in education programs and bird watching and raise an awareness of birds. The binoculars that we'll be contributing to the winners are contributed to us by Optics for the Tropics. So much appreciation to Optics for the Tropics for that contribution. So thank you all. I'm going to close this session. And again, one more time, I appreciate your time and your energy for conservation.
Okay, and one last comment. Thanks, Sue, for all you do and Environment for the Americas, your support. And if everybody could look at their cameras and smile, I want to do one screenshot.
Now, that's a good idea.
Yeah,
thank you.
Here we go. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
The best. Awesome. Got it.
I get
Thank
one.
you.
There you go. Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.
It's great, Sue.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anthony.
Good to see everybody.